Hello, everyone. My name's Ian, and today I'm discussing this giant statue in a shipyard digital illustration. I'm also going to mostly to be talking about why I like working with reflections, because that's going to appear an awful lot in this particular piece, and led a lot. Well, basically, that was a lot of the inspiration for wanting to work on it. This is being painted in Clip Studio Paint on my Huion Kamvas 16 Pro 2.5K tablet, screen tablet. You can see I'm using a arthritis glove here with the stylus. Um, this is being done entirely from the initial sketch phase to the final painting in this program and using this equipment. Um, this is based on a photo of my friend Steffi. We've done a couple of other pieces in the past. You can see on the screen now. And I had done a Medusa statue pencil illustration a little while ago that I ended up doing a color tinting process on this particular piece on the screen right now. And it gave me the inspiration for wanting to do another piece like it, another giant statue piece, only this time the statue's moving and wandering into a harbor setting, um, having that same sense of size. I wanted to deal with something on that scale. I wanted to deal with very similar textures and such as in that giant Medusa statue piece. Um, Found some reference photos that I had taken of Steffi that would work really well for that, and looked around for some other harbor references, some references for disused maritime equipment, a lot of old boats, a lot of tugs, things like that. Um, and really love the idea of playing specifically with water reflections, these kinds of textures. Um, Also, with the design of her head, this sort of the headpiece built into the statue, loosely inspired by the idea of the Medusa, of all the snakes coming off of it. Only this time going with a spike idea. I've been seeing a lot of spiked headdresses um, lately in a lot of different resources, and I really like that idea. Thought I would play with it gives me, it's evocative of the Medusa thing without being exactly the same thing. Although after working on this piece, I ended up doing a Medusa walking through water piece, the one you see on screen right now, with my friend Zoe. Um, just again, keep like going back to playing with water reflections. I actually took this photo that's on screen right now a of a passenger vessel in the town of Kenora, Ontario, a few weeks ago, specifically because of the reflections underneath it and how I've already been using those sorts of reflections in these other pieces. So, um, even with those various, even working with all those reference materials, the various photos of models, the various photos of different equipment, Um, when I come to put together the composition, I still prefer to work as though uh, the reference model is the inspiration, but I will start illustrating as though I didn't have one. So you can see earlier on when I started this that I was constructing the main figure out of smaller forms. An elongated circle for the head, a larger one for essentially the rib cage, and building it out that way. That way, it doesn't end up becoming just a portrait. It doesn't. You're not too limited by the particular muscularity, the particular range of motion of the photo. Um, you still get to put a little bit more life into it. You get to inject a bit more than it just being an adaptation of a photo. So my work tends to be a blend of the two, working because I'm almost always working with reference material. But I always want to make it my own. I want to be able to add in my own. Want to make sure to have that energy, that dynamic storytelling going on. It means I get to adjust things. For instance, she wasn't holding something in her hand, in her left hand. She wasn't crushing something in her right hand in the original photos. This meant I got to do a lot more with that, with her interacting with a couple of the boats in this harbor. Um, Now, when I do my initial composition, I always start with the main figure or the main focus of the illustration, and so in this case, it's the statue herself, and then build the setting around that, moving forward and backward in space to try to create the entire setting. So eventually, as I move forward in space, filling up the rest of the harbor, then I have these two boats in the deep foreground. They're actually raised up on higher platforms. You don't see the platforms or the dry dock that they're sitting in. You just see the fronts of the boats themselves, but it still conveys that sense of scale. Um, that can be tricky when you're working with particularly megalophobic, inspiring imagery like these giant statues to try and establish that sense of scale. That doesn't just look like a normal person standing in a tub holding a toy boat. You want to try to make it look a bit more like it's some vastly taller entity, and that the harbor itself is at normal scale. And these boats are real boats, trying to create that sense of reality. Um, so once I had the sketches done out in layers, on layers behind them, and actually those sketch layers would be set to multiply so that you can always see the colors beneath them through. They're always interacting with the that black line art. That black line art won't be in the final version. That's just there as a guide for the painting. Um, Even though when I compose the piece, I start with the primary focus of the illustration. When I go to painting, I start with the furthest element away, the deepest background. So in this case, this kind of cloudy sky merging in with the ocean going off in the distance. And one thing I wanted to establish very early on in this background painting is where the horizon line is, because it's going to get a little muddy. It's a little foggy. The final piece will end up being a little bit foggy, a little bit blurry. So I want to make sure that I know where the horizon line is to establish that level of reality and then build it up from there. So this is mostly being done on the same layer, um, creating the cloud pattern in the sky and starting to reflect that into the water below. And the dock I'm playing with actually extends out very far on either side of the illustration and fairly far back. It would actually be a fairly complicated structure. So much so that I have these other bits of rigging and dock work further off in the distance that other boats are connected to, and paint starting with those elements with the furthest away from the viewer, and then building up the reflections of the water underneath them to create that little bit of sense of space between a particular dock and a boat that would be in front of it, and then just keep building it up that way. So I've got one dock with a construction gantry on it, um, another boat in front of that, and already introducing reflections in the water, both of the boat and the gantry, but also the light, also the clouds above it, and then moving further forward in space, creating the second dock and that construction equipment on it. And in each one of these pieces, working quite hard to make sure they all look like three-dimensional objects, that they're not just quick squiggles in the background, but they actually have a sense of weight and mass. And playing with both light and color, generally where the boat and where the gantries are pointed towards the deeper background, I have it as a fairly neutral color, a fairly sort of a brownish gray, but when they're aimed towards the viewer, there's a slight bit more blue, and that blue would be what's reflecting from the water itself, because not only is the water a reflective surface, it's also reflecting light back onto the objects that are sitting near it. So the sky above it is turning the water blue, but the blue water is then turning some of the objects near it a shade of blue as well. So there'll be a lot of blue reflections and a lot of blue green reflections throughout this entire piece. I had been thinking that generally the um, the primary coloring of the statue itself would be kind of greenish, much like the Statue of Liberty or something, but then would also be reflected. Would pick up a lot of the blue from the environment. Would probably pick up a lot of darker, more neutral colors from other things in the environment. Moving further forward in space, starting with this boat that she's crushing in her left hand. Um, Dealing with a lot warmer colors on this to help it separate a bit more, so it doesn't just look like part of the statue. 'Cause, I did want to make sure that it didn't look like the statue was moving forward and that the boat was built into her hand. I wanted to make sure that it looked separate, like it was made of different material than she is. So a lot of warm tones for the interior, where there would be wooden linings and a lot of wooden crates and things like that. The exterior will be a lot cooler because it's a lot of metal. It'll have a metal hull on it, and there might be a lot of different paint jobs over it, but already picking up colors from the environment being reflected back onto that metal. So there's a lot of green, a blue green coming from below. Um, and now we're just, I'd filled in a simple base color for the statue. So that'll be sitting on its own layer. And then putting in a very basic pattern of light and dark. The primary light source on the statue is actually from below. It'll be the light from above bouncing off of the light, off of the water, and then lighting her from below. And I wanted to make that fairly consistent all the way through this piece. So most of the lighting on her, the lightest parts of it, will be from below, um, dealing with this blue-green light, both as part of her and being reflected from the environment. So I wanted to concentrate on that for the most part. Now, I will be adding in some additional side lights, some additional lighting coming from the top to give it a full sense of three-dimensionality, to give it a real sense of mass. Um, Even when I'm painting in the light sources now, my first pass was just using basically a simple airbrush, a very soft brush to create the overall shapes. But then as I start going in to paint it a bit more, uh, this is where I'll want to put in more of the feel of it being a rocky, broken surface, as though it's this stone statue. Now, most of the time when I'm painting, I like to paint from dark to light. I'll start with the darkest color, and that's what I'd been doing on the boats and on the gantries and on the docks with the giant statue here. Instead, I chose a mid-tone, basically the middle color for the entire figure. And that was her base color. Then I started painting in light from below and then adding shadows onto the top. Um, as much as I like playing, just painting with light and always painting from dark to light, it's also, I also like mixing up my procedures a little bit once in a while. Keeps things fresh. Um, in this case, it would also prevent the statue from getting too dark. One major issue with always painting from dark to light is that if you don't pay attention to that enough, you can end up making things a little bit too dark, especially if you end up um, you're doing things that only ever get seen on the internet. But then later on, you decide you want to print them. You'll wonder why the printed image is so much darker, and that always happens. Your printed image is always much darker than whatever appears on screen, whatever appears on websites, forums, anything on the internet. Um, So it's also a good idea to keep an eye on the mathematical values. Like I've got uh, that'll be blocked by the video of me on this, but I have CMYK sliders, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, K standing for black, showing the mathematical value that I'm painting with at any given point. And I can also, whenever I use the eyedropper tool, it'll also show me the precise mathematical values of all those numbers. So I can keep an eye on the fact that it's not getting darker than I want it to be. So um, to try to minimize that, the figure getting too dark, because I want it to be fairly light in the final version. This will have this light, hazy look to it all. That's why in this case I actually started with the mid-tone and then painted in highlights and then painted in some of the shadows, the darker things. And now you can also see where I've been playing with color an awful lot. I put in the basic pattern of light and dark, but then I started tweaking the color itself. So it's a little bit grayer. There's more blues in it now, more grays, almost purples in places. The primary color still has a sense of green, but a very nautical blue green. Not quite as blue as the water, but clearly influenced by that. Um, Again, that Statue of Liberty idea, the idea of the oxidized copper can have a similar color pattern to certain types of larger statues. I want it to fall somewhere between those, between the color pattern of the Statue of Liberty and the giant Buddha statues in Japan, because the darker colors of the Statue of Liberty would give her depth. I wouldn't be having her being too bright because I still want a lot of definition. I still want to be able to have the viewer easily see the broken fabric on the figure, the expression on her face. None of that would get washed out in this environment. So, playing with a bunch of different ideas, but having the color of the statue be different from the water means in the reflection that you can now see under her, it isn't just the exterior uh, of the character of the statue that you can see reflected in the water. It's a slightly different color to show that this is the color of the statue being reflected in that water. It's not a massive difference, but it's a little bit of a difference. It's a subtle thing. And as much as possible, I'm wanting to make the coloring and texture on that giant statue be a little subtle. Difficult trick to pull off when you're working with something that's supposed to be that large and you still want it to feel like it's that large. Um, Now moving to the ship that's docked beside her that she's actually holding on to right beside the dock. And my intent here is that she's holding on to it, but she's also crushing it. So it's moving a bit, it'll be twisting, and also parts will be flying off of it. Like with the ship in her other hand, it's a mix of both warm and cool tones. The cool tones being the hull of the ship, wherever it's touching the water. The warm tones are the interior, where it's mostly made of wood. A lot of wooden crates, a lot of wooden superstructure. Um, the cargo, presumably in wooden crates, things like that. Also, the metal itself will be rusting a lot. So it'll when that metal is rusting, it ends up turning to a warm color. It turns into a much warmer, redder, browner color. And again, everything that's touching the water, I'm wanting to make sure is reflected in the water. So not only am I just reflecting the image itself, but the fact that because she's moving through the water, she's creating waves and ripples in the water. So the way that the water is reflecting the various things in the environment will change. And it means that you can easily have a streak of light blue right through the middle of reflecting a very dark um, ship hull or something else like that, and that just indicates that the water is moving in space. It's changing its shape, so it's reflecting light from different angles. Also, a little bit of the translucency of the water, but from this distance, Mostly it's just the reflective the qualities you're seeing. It'd be very much like what something like Mercury would look like from this distance. Um, Now, as I go along working on the ship, building up detail the same way I was on the main figure. Um, where I'm as I go along, I'm adding in extra posts coming off of it, all this extra rigging and everything. The trick with working on a really complicated object that's covered in rigging, that's covered in a whole bunch of extra detail, is you leave all that part for last. You start with you do everything in stages. Just start with the main shape of the object you're working on, figuring out the basic pattern of light and dark over that entire piece as a large shape. And as you work on it, then you start building up. Well, what are the smaller details? Do I have, a large tower with a crow's nest on it? Well, I'll leave that for a little bit later because I don't want to start with that because then all my attention will be focused just on that and the rest of the ship won't look as interesting, which is fine if the intent of your illustration is to show that crow's nest. If your intent for that illustration is that the crow's nest is part of the ship, but you're wanting to show the reaction or the relationship between the statue and the ship and not any one particular element of the ship, you're better off starting from the simple objects and making it more complicated as you go along and adding in those more complicated effects later. Now that I've done the background ships, I've done the basic painting on her, and I've done the basic painting of the ship she's holding and another one that's a little bit further forward in space. That's when I started playing with another atmospheric layer. Um, Basically, the screen layer that I was using a gradient tool over her head was actually also going down quite a bit below, down to where the ships are. That's getting that fog effect. That's getting that nice mist effect, which will serve to work with the reality of the setting. Very misty, very humid environment, but will also push her back further in space. The fact that you see such a tall image right now has an awful lot of detail on it. By putting mist over it and minimizing that detail or reducing the impact of that detail, which can really serve to push her back further in space. And basically conveys the concept of size even more. There's all that detail on something that's that far away, but with that layer of mist, it can really make the figure look even bigger. Um, and that this isn't just a person walking through a small pond. No, this is this giant statue walking through a harbor. Um, as I continue to move forward in space, now I'm working on the larger dock area, adding in some detail for the surface of this wooden dock. It'll be a combination of materials. It probably was originally this big wooden dock, and they end up putting down metal plates on it later for support and to be able to hold things like this large structure so it can raise boats and things out of the water uh, to be able to work on them. And working on figuring out my rough pattern of light and dark. Um, Now, this is taking place during the middle of the day. The sun is high overhead, but everything is misty, so there's this ambient quality to the light. The fact that the sunlight is bouncing through the clouds and through this mist, and it's being bounced off of all of the other things in the environment. It'll make the shadows less sharp. It'll make them a lot fuzzier. So I have a lot more I'm playing with direction of light a lot more in that it'll be coming from multiple directions at the same time. Like moving this far forward in space to the two boats in the deep foreground. Um, the boats indicate a warm light coming from behind and to the left of frame, whereas we've also got this bluer light coming from basically from the point of view of the viewer and slightly to the right. And playing with those two different colors will add a sense of mass to the boat. It could actually mean that it's a fairly neutral color coming from behind and above and slightly to the left, because the basic color of that particular boat is already fairly warm. Again, a lot of wood, a lot of rusted material wherever there's metal. So the base colors will all be fairly warm. But wherever it's blued, that'll be a lot more metal. It'll be have been metal that wasn't affected so much by rust, and it's also just, the light hitting that is a lot cooler, possibly bouncing off of other bluer objects in the environment. Perhaps the hull of the ship that I'm working on right now. The light bouncing off of that back onto the other ship will be distorting that light. And taking a very similar opinion, or a very similar approach to working on this foreground ship, probably a tugboat of some sort. Got this large post that they can wrap cables around. I'm just painting in a basic pattern of light and dark. A lot of my more cyberpunk pieces, there I'm dealing with very restricted light patterns. Like I'll have two or three very obvious light sources, one or two of which will actually be in the illustration itself. So it can create very harsh shadows, very harsh difference between light and dark. Because this is outdoors, I want to make sure that it's not as prominent. Very overcast, so the shadows are not as prominent. The light isn't quite as bright. I don't want to have as much contrast on any particular image, except where I want to insist. I really want to define the fact that there's this railing going around the front of the ship. So I'm creating very deep shadows around that um, from the prow of the ship. But for the most part, we've got some deep shadows around these large, heavy windows. Um, but there's not a whole lot of that really dark color on the rest of the boat. It's just buried in that spot right there around those windows to indicate um, that it's a heavy reinforced set of windows, um, meant to be, it's meant to withstand huge storms and huge waves. So that adds to the mass, the whole sense of mass of this large metal and wood structure. Eventually going in and painting in some spot highlights here and there. So that would indicate like the edges of certain metal objects and metal railings and things like that along the surface of the ship. Um, I don't have any light sources within the frame of this illustration. Like there's nobody pointing a spotlight at anything. Any of the lights that are on the ship are currently turned off. I want to make sure all the lighting is just natural lighting from the environment. Essentially, everything is being lit by the sun, but then that sunlight is filtered and bouncing off of different objects. Um, a little bit different than some of the other pieces I've been doing lately in much more unnatural environments. But for all the machinery and for all the constructed stuff, I want this to be a fairly natural environment. We're dealing with wood, we're dealing with water, we're dealing with stone. We're not dealing with robots, we're not dealing with neon lighting, we're not dealing with any of that kind of stuff. So everything is a very rough, organic feel. Um, which yes, I do like doing in a lot of my cyberpunk pieces, but there'll be even fewer hard edges in any of this. One way to add to the sense of something being destroyed, something being crushed, is having stuff falling off of it. So both pieces of the boat itself and water from when it was first picked up are all coming down off of her hand and off of the ship itself. Um, Adding in tiny splashes of water around the statue itself as it's moving forward in space. Those would be very small because the distance between the viewer and where she's interacting with the water is extremely far. So you really wouldn't see too much, but it would just be like this almost pattern of a bright dots of light kind of sparkling. Uh, and yeah, just taking a look at the last parts of this particular piece. And here's the final composition. So thank you very much for hanging out and watching this. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video.